Dear BalkanPod listeners, I'm Dilek Kütük from Turkey, and today we will talk about Biden's US election victory and its consequences for Albanians in the Balkans. My guest is Olsi Jazexhi. He's an Albanian-Canadian historian who mostly focuses on national identity, religion, and geopolitical matters. He's also a social activist, media critic, and journalist. Welcome to BalkanPod, dear Jazexhi. I'm really appreciated you accepted my invitation.
Thank you for inviting me.
My first question will be about, of course, US elections. So I think for Albania, it doesn't matter who is the president in America. The matter is America itself because, Albanians are the number one nation in the Balkans supporting US. And maybe, the Prime Minister Edi Rama congratulated Biden for his victory. So what do Albanians expect from the US government in the new period?
The Albanians were, in fact, very much interested about the elections in the United States because the Americans have been detrimental on the independence of Kosovo. So it was the NATO intervention in Kosovo in 1999, which enabled Kosovo to separate itself from Serbia. And continuous American administrations, they have been very friendly with the Albanians, but the recent Trump administration was not friendly. The Trump administration was friendly with Serbia, and this thing worried the Albanians a lot. The economic normalization agreement that the Trump administration made between the government of Serbia and Kosovo a few weeks ago was very worrying because Trump administration forced the Albanians of Kosovo to retract from their independence and to give many benefits to Serbia without anything in the return. On the other hand, the Trump administration, in a way, pressured the government in Pristina to establish relations with Israel and to place the embassy of Kosovo in Jerusalem. And this thing worried a lot the Muslim voters of Albania and Kosovo because Albanian Muslims, they do not agree with Israeli policies of annexation of East Jerusalem and the proclamation by the Trump administration of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So the elections in the United States were seen with a lot of interest from Albania and Kosovo. And the victory of Biden was great news for the Albanians because they hope and pray that the Americans will not abandon the Albanians and in particular the issue of Kosovo like the Trump administration was doing.
Vučić, ex-President Taci and Edi Rama also, they are really pragmatic leaders. So do you think that they will move the embassies to the Jerusalem now?
As far as I know, the Albanians are not keen to move their embassies to Jerusalem because the American control over the governments of Albania and Kosovo is huge, and Albanian politicians, they are afraid from the Americans. They do not want to upset them because if they upset them, then they will have many problems locally. So because of this, before they were in a way, at least by speaking, supporting the Trump administration and its servitude towards the government of Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. But now with the election of Biden, everybody is hopeful here in the Balkans. All Albanians hope that US policies towards the Muslim world are going to change. Americans are not going to humiliate the Albanians like they were during the Trump administration. And moreover, many people hope that Biden is going to follow the policies of President Barack Obama, who was more friendlier to the Muslim world than the Trump administration is.
The Kosovo Specialist Chambers was not created in response to the domestic pressure from within the Kosovo. It was the result of the external pressure, frankly. So now this court confirmed the indictment against the Kosovo Liberation Army leaders. For instance, President Hashim Taci, ex-President Hashim Taci, former parliament speakers Kadri Veseli and Jakub Krasniqi, and former Vetëvendosje member of the parliament Recep Selimi. So how do you see the future of this case? Do you think Taci has made a big bargain with the EU? And on the other hand, what will happen to the dialogue on the normalization of relation between Pristina and Belgrade amid this situation?
Trump administration was very hostile to Albanians and to all Muslims in general, and was very friendly to Serbia. A few months ago, we had the forceful sacking of Prime Minister Albin Kurti from his position in Pristina. We had a kind of a coup d'etat, which was organized in Pristina by the US Embassy, which used Hashim Thaçi and the Democratic League of Isa Mustafa to oust Albin Kurti, because Albin Kurti was not accepting the blackmails of Richard Grenell, the special envoy of President Trump for the Balkans, and the blackmails of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who wanted Kosovo to recognize Serbia, to remove its blockade on Serbian goods, and in return to get nothing from Serbia. So the Trump administration have been very, very hostile and scary for the Albanians. And the latest arrest of Hashim Thaçi, Jakub Krasniqi, Kadri Veseli, it seems for many people here in the Balkans as the final revenge by the Trump administration against the Albanians. It is a total national humiliation that the Trump administration did against the Kosovar leadership, the leadership of UÇK or KLA, the Kosovo Liberation Army, an army which allied itself with the United States and cooperated with NATO on liberation of Kosovo. But as many of your listeners know, the Trump administration was very hostile to NATO, hostile to the Kosovars. Trump has been on record refusing the NATO intervention in Kosovo in 1999. And the latest arrests of the top leadership of Kosovo, a leadership which was, by the way, very subservient to the Americans. They did anything the Americans wanted them to do. But even though they were very subservient to the Americans, finally, before leaving office, we believe in the Balkans, that it was the US administration which ordered the arrest of top leadership of Kosovo in order and in a way to appease the Serbs. American government has been very hostile even towards Albania. We in Albania are forced by the Americans to host two terrorist organizations. One of them are the Iranian Mujahideen or Mujahideen al-Halq, which is a terrorist organization blacklisted in many countries. It was proclaimed as a terrorist even by the American government until 2012. And on the other hand, the institutions of Islam here in Albania are controlled by FETÖ or Fethullah Gülen terrorist organization. Many of these people who are wanted probably in Turkey, they have been brought to Albania and they control the institutions of Islam. And Albanian governments cannot do anything against the Mujahideens or against the Fethullah Gülen group because the Americans ask our governments to keep them here and to give them what they want. So Albanians were not very happy with the Trump administration, be them in Albania or in Pristina. They had much better relations with the Obama administration and before that. And now with the election of Joe Biden in the United States, the leadership of Pristina and Tirana, they're finally breathing free and hoping that U.S. policies towards Albanians are going to change. It was not a normalization process, but it was a humiliation process. This deal, which was personally written by Richard Grenell, the special envoy for President Trump for Serbia and Kosovo, it was a total humiliation for the Kosovars because this agreement forced the Kosovars to, for 1 year, suspend their independence, to allow Serbia to sell its products to Kosovo, while Serbia does not recognize Kosovo. It forced the Kosovars not to ask from international institutions for indictment of war criminals who are in Serbia, who have killed Albanian Muslims during the era of Slobodan Milosevic. On the other hand, this so-called normalization agreement, it served to Serbia. This agreement had two objectives. Number one, to force Kosovo and Serbia to recognize the superiority of Israel over themselves, whereby Serbia and Kosovo were forced to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move their embassies to Jerusalem. Number two, this agreement forced Kosovo and Serbia to declare Hezbollah a terrorist organization. But Kosovo and Serbia has never been to war with Hezbollah, and they have no interest on going to war for the sake of Israel with Hezbollah. And the third point was that the agreement, which was designed by Richard Grenell and Jared Kushner, awarded Serbia what it could not get from Turkey, from the Ottoman Empire during the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 and the Congress of Berlin of 1878. It awarded Serbia what it could not get from the Albanians during the First World War. It awarded Serbia what it could not get after the Second World War. In both these wars, Yugoslavia was a victorious power, but the aim of Serbs have historically been, since the Russo-Turkish War of 1877, their dream has always been to have access to the Adriatic Sea. I mean, the first Balkan War, when it happened, the Serbs fought against the Ottoman Empire because they wanted to get to the Adriatic Sea of Albania. But they could not get these things because even though they won these wars, they could not get anything because they were not allowed by powers of Europe. But this agreement of Richard Grenell, if you have read it, gave to Serbia access to the Adriatic Sea and port of Shëngjin, which is in Albania. The agreement, which was written by Jared Kushner and Richard Grenell, makes Serbia a regional superpower here in the Balkans. It forces Kosovo and Albania to open its territories for building a highway and a railway from Beograd to the port of Shëngjin in Albania. And this railway and highway for Serbia will be built by money that big American bankers who stand behind Jared Kushner are going to loan to Albania, Kosovo, and Serbia. And these loans, for this access that Serbia wants to have to the Adriatic Sea, the loans are going to be paid by Albanians. So it was a total humiliation. In the case of Albanians, the Trump administration forced the leadership of Pristina and Tirana to put their countries into a huge loan, which was going to be taken by bankers connected with Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump. And Albanians were going to construct a road with their own borrowed money for Serbia. And Serbia was going to get access to the Adriatic Sea. Sultan Abdul Hamid made the League of Prizren for Albanians in order to block these imperialist projects of Serbia and Russia. But Trump, who is very Serbophile, forced the governments of Albania and Kosovo to humiliate themselves, to, number one, declare war on the Muslim world, because by recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the Kosovars humiliated themselves in the front of Turkey, of Iran, and all the Muslim countries, because Kosovo was going to be the first Muslim country to send an embassy in Israel. And this thing is totally unpopular in the Balkans, and especially in Kosovo. If you make a referendum and you ask Kosovars, do you want to do this? They will reject it because they're Muslim. And so the Trump administration, with the normalization agreement, humiliated Albania and Kosovo with the Muslim world, with Turkey, and humiliated Albania and Kosovo with Iran by making them enemies of Iran. And as I mentioned before, here in Albania, Americans have forced our government to host 7,000 Iranian terrorists, jihadis. We have a huge paramilitary camp here, which is run by a terrorist organization which makes killings against Iran, Iraq, and other countries. And on the other hand, the Trump administration did the best that it could to award Serbia and to give to Serbia something that not only the Ottomans, not only the Albanians, but even the British, even the French fought so hard during the 19th century and the 20th century against the Russians, to stop the Serbian advance towards the Adriatic Sea.
You said that with the Trump administration, Serbia is becoming a superpower in the region. So my question will be about actually Edi Rama, because Edi Rama is leading many projects in the Balkans. What do you think about